Top 5 teams on shaky ground in 2023. These are teams that look, and I don't know. Like, there's one of them that might be kind of up for debate, but it's kind of been, an off season of uneven news, or even going back into the regular season of at best uneven news. So number 5, Houston. It just did not. I mean, they closed better than they started. That's for sure at Houston, but. Dana Holgerson's got to get his arms around that. There were just things that happened all through last year that, really kind of make you think of the last year of Gary Patterson, where you've got infighting, the whole world's against you. Dana Holgerson makes it seem like none of it's his fault. It's on this, it's on that. And it just was so unbalanced, uneven at Houston. And they're entering a new conference next year with the Big 12 becoming a Power 5 team. It's probably not totally imperative on him to do very well in that first year, but I do think he needs to show that team belongs there right away and doesn't have a huge mountain to climb as they go in.
Yeah, they won their bowl games. They at least finished on a nice note, but earlier in the season, it definitely seemed like that thing was barely, hanging on at the seams. When you got guys getting into fights on the sidelines like we saw so publicly, and you're losing football games. Still, however, this is a team that lost by 3 points to Texas Tech in a barn burner of a game. Lost to Tulane by 3 points. It lost to SMU by 7 by 14, a crazy shootout, 77-63. Remember that game? That was nuts. And lost to Tulsa by a touchdown. So, outside of that SMU game, which they still scored 63 points and lost because they gave up 77, they played everybody but Kansas pretty tight. Got a nice win over UTSA. Yes, you'd expect Houston to beat UTSA given where they are at levels, but there's at least room. I say all that to say they weren't that far away from being much better record-wise, and they ended on a win, as I mentioned, in the bowl game. So, we'll see, but they're definitely not riding a whole lot of momentum, that's for sure. And I do think that Dana is enough of a lightning rod that if they have some of those same types of issues next year, then I do think that you have to start kind of going, all right, like how long are we going to do this little, tug of war here? And especially given that, look, this isn't little P5 Houston now, too, because it's the next guy that they hire. If they hire a guy in the next few years because Dana doesn't work out, they're going to be shooting the same way that Baylor shoots and TCU and everybody else, when they go after a head coach. So there's higher expectations now. They can't have a American Athletic Conference, AAC expectations, all due respect. They got to bump that up a notch. So, yeah, I think Dana's somebody that's got to be very very confident in what they're putting out there as a product next year.
Also, we're kind of in the post-Urban Meyer era of coaches now, where you can't just be a jerk and then write it off as this is how I am.
Gary Patterson.
You just can't, Gary Patterson. Like, that's just not playing the way it is. And so, and I don't know if Dana Holgerson is or not. I just know that what I've seen, the last couple of years is a little
He has a reputation.
Yeah. You can't just be like, this is how I am. I'm the coach. You can't touch me. And I think the guy who's at the top of this list also needs to learn that lesson in spite of the fact that he's got a ring on his finger 8-9 years ago. Number 4, West Virginia. Neil Brown is kind of the opposite of Dana Holgerson. I think Neil Brown is kind of the nice guy coach. He's kind of unassuming. He is kind of falling into that, Matt Wells category, though, at Texas Tech, where Matt Wells is a good coach and is going to be a good coach a lot of places that he goes. He just wasn't what Texas Tech needed at that time. They weren't good for each other. I'm feeling the same way about Neil Brown in West Virginia and just the way that things have gone transfer portal-wise for that team, and Ren Baker's there as the new athletic director. Obviously, Neil Brown has some runway this year to get it right, but, again, how long does Ren Baker want to sit there and cycle through this when he can make a hire that's one of his guys?
Yeah, how often do new ADs come in and football coach just stays there forever after that?
Yeah.
And even if you were to give me an example, show me how many games that coach won. I bet it's a bunch. Not what Neil Brown's putting out there right now, which is not even making a bowl game this year, and not even really feeling like they ever even sniffed one, quite frankly. There was a sour mood, I think, as the season kind of went along around Morgantown. Even, you get the Baylor win relatively, the middle of the year to earlier part of the year. And it's like, I remember looking at the responses, and there were some West Virginia fans that were like, awesome. But it wasn't like what you would think. You think like, man, big Thursday night win, Big 12. at home. Close game, all that, and there wasn't the level of excitement that I expected at all. And I was like, wow, things really are bad up there right now. And I did a podcast interview a few weeks later, and just the vibe I got was, just we want something new and different and a change here. And so, yeah, I mean, Neil Brown's, there's no denying he's walking into this. He's a dead man walking if things don't change in a major way. Obviously, Graham Harrell's now gone. JT Daniels is out the door. So, I know they feel like they've got Martial. They'll be like the next big thing at quarterback. So we'll see how that goes. But, they're in a must-win position heading into the next year for sure.
Yeah. Number 3, Clemson. Now, this team is on the most solid of the shaky ground, in my opinion, because they are Clemson and they are very established. But something is strange there where, look, the number one recruit that they had, to follow up Trevor Lawrence, DJU, didn't work out, transferred out. Cade Klubnik's the starter. I think that's actually going to probably work out pretty well for Clemson over the whole of his career. He's a good player, and it has a lot of skills that he showed, but, he's still got to, be a full-time starter and go through the attrition of a full year. They still have Will Shipley, who they didn't give the ball enough against Tennessee early on to keep in that game, and that was a mistake. But there's just something weird about what's going on at Clemson. And I can tell you, I've watched a lot of Clemson games over the years, and I've never once thought that the head coaching was an issue until the Orange Bowl the other night. And it was just one of the most uneven, poorly coached games I've ever seen Dabo Swinney do. And then he has these, like these moments like where he had he had to ask the NIL question, and he, Bible thumped a little bit instead of just answering a direct question. That's just weird stuff that doesn't fit what Clemson's been for so long, and that's why I put them in this category. Now, look, he could shake that all off and they could go run through the ACC again, but the ACC is getting better around them, so they got to be careful because it's not just their league to win anymore.
11-3.
Yeah, I'll say this respectfully. I do think you have a bit of anti-Dabo bias because you're an FSU guy, which is fine. I'm not judging you on that at all. But I do think you're also very accurate on some of the concerns. So, yeah, I think that it's probably a bit overblown on some people's parts because that's what they want. They want this to be the ground cracking underneath Dabo's feet. But there are also reasons to see, like, is that a crack developing? Like, I think that's a crack. Oh, DJU, that was a major crack. And now you start to look at, some other areas. And I know there's been a lot of chatter about Dabo and the whole, like, keep it in-house with the staff and keep it in-house. Everything's Clemson. And, meanwhile, other programs are going out and they're getting new ideas. They're picking coaches from across the country that played in a different style of ball to get some freshness in there. And I think they do need to refresh in a bit.
Well, and that's what they did. Like when they hired Brent Venables, that took them from being a good team to a great team.
Right.
That's what they did.
Yeah. And so since then, really, we've seen just in-house. And so, yeah, I do think they need a bit of a refresh. I do think Klubnik will be very good. Ultimately, you definitely see some of the good and some of the bad in that last outing, to be sure. I also give Tennessee a lot of credit as well. But like, the thing with Will Shipley is like how many times are you going to give it to him? Like, I totally get where you're coming from. It's like, he's all they have. I mean, he was like all they had, and you can't give it to him 50 times. You'd love to. You probably would have fared better, but like he's still got some time left to play out. So
I guess my wasn't the amount of carries he had; it was why they waited,
distributed the way they were.
Yeah, like why not get him involved early and then make Tennessee go?
It was alarming, like just how much he's the only thing that they really seem to have that was consistently that you could be reliable and could make an impact for them offensively. So, yeah, I do think, any other program would love to have Clemson problems, and 11-3 would be a bad year, and, playing in a big bowl game and all of that. But there are some cracks in the armor that are starting to develop for sure. And I don't think the NIL thing, I think I don't know what that was in his mind, if he thought that was super funny, he had to have, or what else that really was as far as how he really feels. But that is something that is just one of those, like, keep that stored away in the back of your mind as things kind of move forward, his whole handling of that side of things.
All right, on Will Shipley, he had 210 carries. Bijan Robinson, with another guy in the backfield with him, had 258 carries and missed a game.
Yeah. And, yeah, with Will Shipley, it's just that in that particular game, I'm like, look, this is where you kind of need him, and you've got some time to get over it. Like, maybe you give him a couple more carries, but it was, we had a couple touches early on in the game, and then it was like a whole quarter where they were trying to do other things, and then in the fourth quarter when they were losing and had to get back in it, then they start feeding the rock to Will Shipley, and I'm like, well, I mean, do that earlier. And let me be clear, I do have a little bit of Clemson bias. it's not or anti-Dabo bias. It's just he kind of annoys me, but I don't I respect him as a coach. And like I said before, the thing that bothers me about him as an FSU fan is I couldn't figure how are we going to get a better coach than this guy? How are you going to do better? Because he's so good at coaching, and then lately he just doesn't seem to have his fastball anymore.
Yeah, I mean, they lost a couple games that they clearly lost, and you can look at that South Carolina game, and that could have, that obviously was a close loss there. That makes things look a little bit different as well. But, handled their business in the ACC championship game, had no problem whatsoever with North Carolina, so you'd still take that over the alternative any day. But, yeah, I mean, there's definitely – nobody's got him on a hot seat, but everybody's watching like his NIL comments or the quarterback handling or, just any number of things, staff hires, and you are starting to go like, that could all start to really add up if you're not careful with it. And I think that everybody's kind of on the same page there.
The second coach on this list kind of falls in the same boat as Dabo in that I kind of feel like, are they over it? Are they over this whole thing and the way that it's changed? Because they are old school dude, and it's Mike Gundy in Oklahoma State. They've lost so many players, including their starting quarterback, who, as you saw without him this year, they were nothing on offense. And Mike Gundy, it's kind of like Jimbo Fisher. If you're not good on offense, that's Mike Gundy's thing, right? What are you doing? And it's just weird right now. They keep losing transfers, and that was a program that was a hair's breadth away from the Big 12 title a year ago and really looked loaded for bear to make a run again. Injuries ravaged them this year, and then after that, it's just like this thing is falling apart.
I don't know what to make of the situation in Stillwater right now. Like you, I'm kind of searching for what's really true, because what you're saying is what it seems like. It seems like Mike Gundy has no real desire to be there anymore, and we know he's tried to leave in the past, but hey, a lot of coaches have tried to leave a lot of different places. There's only so many of those jobs where you just want to stay forever, but he has been there a really long time. And, I get the sense from the fan base, too, that they're just kind of over it at this point. His shenanigans, they dealt with the I'm a man, I'm 40, the OAN shirt, like just various little rambles, that he's gone, or rants that he's gone on, including most recently after that bowl game when he was, I think, poorly handling the exchange with that reporter, and I think just lashing out at a guy he could lash out against, because I don't think he would have done that against somebody that would have yelled back at him, quite frankly. So I don't like that.
He wouldn't have done that to Barry Trammell.
No, absolutely not. But I don't like that kind of tough guy thing. If you can back it up and all that, and I'm sure Mike Gundy in his own way is a tough guy, but that was very much a guy taking advantage of his position as the head coach in that situation. There's a lot of things that could grind your gears if you're an Oklahoma State fan, and I definitely see, his point of view too, where he's been somewhere a really long time, and maybe he just feels like he's tapped out. Maybe he feels like he's done what he can do. I don't know, but it certainly doesn't feel like, if you were to peg, is he there in 3 years if you had to put money on it? I think you're saying no. I don't think that you think that he is, right?
Well, I would have said that 5 years ago.
Right. So, but now at this point, it's like, really, what is the future there? It just feels like it's coming to a boiling point, but we'll see.
Yeah. And number one, Texas A&M. We knew this anyway. They're 5-7. The recruiting hasn't suffered. They still are going to have a great recruiting class. Obviously not as good as the number one class they had last year, but a lot of those guys, several of those guys are gone. But I just don't know how the culture situation is going to work out there with the cantankerous four that they have in Jimbo Fisher, Bobby Petrino, DJ Durkin, and Steve Adazio. And I'm not even mentioning other guys on staff, but those are guys that, Steve Adazio is not a head coach in college football after 3 tries because he can't build a successful culture. DJ Durkin is not a head coach in college football because his negligence led to a player's death. Bobby Petrino is not a head coach at the highest level of college football anymore, not because of his knowledge, but because his negligence and his attitude led to bad things happening to him and around him, and he's always got one foot out the door, as UNLV fans know after 3 weeks anyway. And Jimbo Fisher's a guy who's kind of stuck in a circle of, well, I did this well 9 years ago. Well, the world changes a lot in 9 years, man. So I just don't know how they build the culture with a staff like that. And maybe I'm wrong, and this is from the outside looking in, but, I would have, if I'm Jimbo Fisher, gone for a guy who is maybe a little bit more upbeat energy-wise and has some juice behind him, as opposed to a guy like Bobby Petrino, who's clearly on his last coaching legs.
He didn't want to hire him.
Yeah.
He didn't want to hire somebody to call plays. So, I'm not saying he didn't want to hire Petrino. When you look at all the other options, he did not even want to have to do it.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. on the one hand, I was saying earlier, I just think culturally it kind of is a bad fit when you add up all the pieces. It's not, if it was just Bobby Petrino, okay, but you add in, other names as well that they've chosen to go with on that staff. And it's just kind of like, if other teams did this, like how badly would they get raked over the coals? You know what I mean? I think Bobby Petrino is obviously a fantastic football coach. I mean, he knows way more about it than I ever will. And I think that he knows how to coach ball, but I do wonder just the pieces, how well they fit together. And maybe they fit really well. I mean, I don't for one second think that this is automatically going to be a massive failure of a hire. I probably came across that way somewhat earlier, but I don't think it's guaranteed to not work out. I just have my questions about whether or not it's going to work out. It's like any other coaching hire in that way. I understand, but I don't not think that he knows football. I just don't know culturally, yes, and kind of how the characters work together here. If that's like the missing piece for A&M to get over the hump offensively and as a team, I just have my reservations about that. But I will gladly sit back and eat my popcorn like everybody else and wait to see it either completely combust like it could or turn into Jimbo's saving grace ultimately.
Yeah, look, and I hope it works out. I just don't. In my mind, I just can't see it. And again, it's not about the X and O of it. They've got those guys can all X and O. Everybody can draw it up on the board. Everybody can coach it out. But it's about more than that as A&M saw this year.
Power struggles and back behind the scenes, yes, very much so. There's reasons to have questions about that. But Jimbo had to have known that making the hire when he did. So we'll see.
All right, good stuff.